We have Census Bureau Geographic Products with Kevin Hawley and Suzanne McCardle. Kevin, Suzanne, are you ready, and would you like to start now?
Hey, John, I'm ready if you want to start now. Yep.
Great. So we'll start with Kevin. Kevin Hawley is the Assistant Division Chief for Geospatial Products in the Geography Division of the U.S. Census Bureau. And Suzanne McCardle is the Chief of the Enterprise Geospatial Services Branch in the Geography Division of the Census Bureau, where she leads the creation and release of geographic program materials, including reference maps and thematic maps. Please go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really nice to be here to talk about some of our geospatial products that we produce at the Census Bureau and release to the public. I'm going to go ahead and get started here by pointing you to the Geography Program webpage. The URL is at the top of the screen here. And the easiest way to get to this page is if you go to census.gov and you click on this topics menu up here on the top left, and then choose geography from within that menu. That'll take you right to this page. At the top of this page, you'll see some information about our geographic support strategic plan and our geographic support program address maintenance strategy. As you scroll down that page, you'll start to see some of our products. So there's a featured section that links to some of our more popular products. There's a mapping file section, a reference map section, and a reference file section. And throughout this presentation, I'll be talking about a lot of those products. All right, so to get started, we're gonna talk about our Tigerline files. And I know a lot of our GIS users are very familiar with our Tigerline files, which are spatial extracts of our geographic database known as Tiger. We've been providing Tigerline files to the public since 1992. And prior to 2007, the Tigerline files were sets of fixed-length relational ASCII files that required users to use translation software to put them into some sort of usable format. So in 2007, we stopped releasing those legacy Tigerline format, and we moved to releasing Tigerline files as shapefiles. And then through the years, we've introduced two additional formats. In 2013, we started releasing Tigerline geodatabases, which are in file geodatabase format. And then in 2024, we started releasing Tigerline geo packages, which are in an open format that's based on the Open Geospatial Consortium or OGC standard. So we currently have Tigerline files available in three formats: shapefiles, geodatabases, and geo packages. There are some differences between the shapefiles and the other two formats in terms of the way they're packaged and in terms of the attributes. We're going to be expanding the attributes that are in the geodatabases and geo packages in the future so that they match the attributes that are in the shapefiles. All right, so what's in a Tigerline file? What are these? Well, they're spatial files. They include geographic area boundaries, so things like states and counties, incorporated places, census tracts, all that stuff that John was talking about in the beginning for geographic areas. Those are all included in these Tigerline files. We now include two different versions of the geographic identifiers, the GeoID and the GeoIDFQ. I'm going to talk about those in a future slide. And then they also include geographic features like roads, railroads, landmarks, hydrography, and they include relationship files for address ranges, topological faces, and feature names. You'll also see at the bottom of these pages, we have three links here. This is for the shapefiles, for the geodatabases, and for the geo packages. Each of these screens will have links at the bottom with like the full length spelled out. So if you want to grab the screen or something, you'll have that information on it. Each of the ones that have an actual product on it will have that. All right. This is a view of TigerWeb. So if you're not a GIS user, you're not really going to be able to do anything with those shapefiles if you download them, but you do want to see the geography. Check out TigerWeb. I'm going to kind of leave it at that. Suzanne's going to, in her presentation after this, she's going to dive into this a little bit more. So I'll just leave it at that for now. TigerWeb. Okay, so let's talk about the geographic identifiers. So Our Tiger line files and many of our other files include geographic identifiers that are associated with the geographic areas. So there are two main types of geographic identifiers. The first is the GeoID, and that's a concatenation of the geographic area codes that are required to uniquely identify a geography within a particular layer. The second type is the GeoID FQ. Think of that FQ as fully qualified. So this is basically the fully qualified version of the GeoID. And it includes information about summary level, the geovariant, the geocomponent, and then also that unique information that makes the geography unique. So the fully qualified GeoID uniquely identifies a geography throughout the entire universe of summary levels. So let's take a look at an example here. This is for Fairfax County, Virginia. If we look at the GeoID, again, that's a concatenation of the fields that make it unique geographically. So in this case, for a county, we need the state codes. So it's the state FIPS code. And we're in Virginia, so the state FIPS code for Virginia is 51. And then the county FIPS code for Fairfax County within Virginia is 059. That 059 is not unique throughout all states, but it is unique within Virginia. You combine the two, 51059, that's your GeoID. That uniquely identifies Fairfax County within a list of counties. If we look at the fully qualified GeoID, we are taking into account the summary level. So the summary level for a county record is summary level 050. And then we look at our geovariant and geocomponent. In this case, they're both 00. And then there is a fixed two-character field, which is US. And then we have the state FIPS code and the state and the county FIPS code concatenated together. So we get this longer code 0500000 US 51059. That is the GeoID that you're going to get if you pull something from data.census.gov. So if you're pulling ACS data from data.census.gov, you pull out a CSV file and you want to join it to a shapefile, this is the field that you're going to want to use to do that join, the GeoID FQ. Okay, we also have still on the spatial side of things, we have cartographic boundary files. And cartographic boundary files are, they're basically simplified representations of geographic area boundaries that are best used for small scale thematic mapping and web map applications. So for example, if you're making a thematic map of population density by county for the entire United States on an 8.5 by 11 sheet, you definitely don't need, and you probably don't want, all of the detail that's associated with tiger line files. They're just too many coordinates. And the same is true for web map applications that use dynamic services. So if you're building web map applications that use dynamic services at smaller scales, it'll take more time if you're rendering the full resolution of a tiger line file. So at smaller scales, cartographic boundary files will allow these services to render faster. They're also clipped to a representative coastline, which means that geographic areas like states are going to look more like the way people think of how states look. We create cartographic boundary files at 3 different scales, 1 to 20 million, 1 to 5 million, and 1 to 500,000. So 1 to 20 million, think let's say you're trying to map the entire United States and you're working with a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. That's roughly 1 to 20 million. That would be the appropriate file to use for that. Let's say we're now mapping the United States, but instead of on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, we're creating a wall map. You're probably going to be closer to 1 to 5 million for that. And then if you're at the 1 to 500,000 range, you're looking at on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, somewhere between like a city and a metro area, somewhere in that general range for the most part. These are geographic area boundaries. So they're for all those geographic areas that John was talking about earlier, things like states, counties, incorporated places, and so on. So here's an example showing coordinates in the cartographic boundary files compared to the tiger line files. And so to demonstrate the differences between these, all 3 of these images here are captured at a scale of 1 to 500,000. Now, that's not typical usage of cartographic boundary files. you would want to display them at roughly the scales that they're designed for, but in order to demonstrate the differences between the different files, they're all displayed here at 1 to 500,000. So in red, we have the tiger line file, and in blue, we have the cartographic boundary file. So let's start on the left-hand side here. So again, this red detailed line is tiger line, and then the blue line is the 1 to 20 million cartographic boundary file. You can see that there are a lot fewer coordinates on the blue line. It's much more simplified than the red line. At this 1 to 500,000 scale, obviously it doesn't look like a great boundary, but if you zoom out to 1 to 20 million at the scale that it's designed for, you really won't be able to tell a difference between these two lines. Let's move to the middle where we have the 1 to 5 million cartographic boundary file overlaid with tiger line. Again, the cartographic boundary file is simplified compared to the tiger line, but it's more detailed than the 1 to 20 million. We've got quite a few more coordinates in there that define the shape a little bit better. And again, if we went out to 1 to 5 million, you wouldn't see that difference at all. And then finally on the right here, we have the 1 to 500,000 file overlaid with tiger line. And what you'll notice here is I don't really see any differences anymore. And that's exactly what we want to see, that this file is designed for this scale. And so when we overlay it with tiger line, you're not visually able to see any of those differences. Now, I'll guarantee you there are differences here. There's differences in the coordinates, but you just can't visually see them. And so that's exactly the design we want for these cartographic boundary files. So again, these are great to use for like thematic mapping or web map applications, things like that. You don't want to use the cartographic boundary files for if you're doing like detailed analysis or anything like that. Stick to tiger line if you're doing that kind of thing. All right, here's another visual. This is like a visual comparison, another visual comparison of cartographic boundary files versus tiger line files. So on the left here, we have the cartographic boundary file. This is 1 to 20 million for the contiguous US states. On the right, we have the tiger line file. So I had mentioned before that the cartographic boundary files are clipped to coastline. And so that's where you'll see a lot of differences here. So I'll just point out a few of those that we can compare between the two. So if we look at Michigan here, this looks like the shape that people typically think of when they think of Michigan. That's because basically the Great Lakes are carved out of here because we clip to a coastline. Our coastline includes the oceans and includes the Great Lakes. Over here, if you look at Michigan, this is the actual boundary of Michigan, which to a lot of us probably might not look super familiar, but that's what it actually looks like. So that's the cartographic boundary file, or I mean, that's the tiger line file, which shows your actual boundary. Cartographic boundary file is clipped. If we go down to Florida, we see some differences where on the tiger line file, it looks a lot wider than it does here in the cartographic boundary file. Again, this is just because it's clipped to the coastline. Florida in particular has a 3-mile limit on the ocean side here. And then as we go into the Gulf, it has a 9-mile limit. So it's just because of that narrow shape, it looks a lot, the difference is kind of drastic between the two. Another area where you'll see some difference here is if we look at Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, this boundary here following the Mississippi River. It looks pretty nice and smooth here on our 1 to 20 million cartographic boundary file. We go over to our tiger line file, we see a lot of back and forth. There's just a lot of coordinates here that it's trying to draw. And so again, you don't really need that level of detail when you're producing a map at this scale. Okay, so now we're going to move on from our spatial products into our reference file products. The first ones I'll be discussing are our geographic reference files, or GRFs. These have been internal products that we've used for decades for data tabulation. And we just started releasing them to the public last year as an annual product. So the first type of GRF is the GRFC, which is the geographic reference files codes. So that C basically means codes here. Each record within the GRFC represents a single current census block. and includes geographic area codes that are associated with that block. You may have heard that I said the word current when I said census block. So what does that mean? Well, a current block means it's a 2020 block. So we go to our last decennial, which is 2020. It's a 2020 block that could be suffixed. So if a geographic area boundary of some sort ended up splitting through a 2020 block, then that block will split into two suffixes. Let's say suffix A or B, or it could split into 3 or 4 suffixes. It would be A, B, and C, or A, B, C, and D. So that's what they are. So the vast majority of current blocks are exactly the same as the 2020 blocks. Like most of them, vast majority are not suffixed. There are some that are suffixed, and that's what that suffix means. Within the GRFC, each record has attributes that identify the census block. So the block is identified by the state code, the county code, the tract, the block, and that suffix field. It also includes attributes that identify the tabulation geography that's associated with the block. It'll tell you all the geographic areas associated with the block. So, for example, if a block is in Washington, D.C., it's going to have a place zip code of 5,000. The GRFC also includes attributes associated with the block's geography. So these are things like land area, water area, land, water block type, internal points. It also includes indicator codes like whether the block is in a principal city, or whether it's in a metro area or a micro area, or whether it's urban or rural. Oops. The GRFN is the companion to the GRFC, and the N here means names. So our GRFNs, in this file, each record represents a geographic area whose code exists within the GRFC. So for example, Annapolis, Maryland exists as an incorporated place record in the GRFN. Anne Arundel County exists as a county record within the GRFN. The Math Tiger feature code, Math Tiger feature class code, or MTFCC, that'll differentiate those different geographic area types. It's because they're all just in the one file. So you have a file with places, with counties, with states, with school districts. All the geographic areas are in one file per state. The records include applicable census, FIPS, and national standards codes. They include names and our what's called our name LSAD, which is our name with the legal statistical area description. They include water area, land area, internal points, centroids, and other attributes like the FIPS class code and the functional status. So here's a visual example of the GRFC and GRFN and kind of what is represented within them and how they connect to one another. These files have a lot more columns than I'm showing here. This is just for demonstration purposes to kind of give you an idea of how the files can work together. So here we have on the right, we have a little section that's highlighted in blue. This is a block. It's highlighted in blue. It's within Nevada. And if we look at the GRFC record that's associated with this, these first 5 columns indicate what they basically tell you what the block is. So these are the identifying fields that identify a block. So we have the top block state, that's the state code, it says 32, that means it's Nevada. The county is 003, means it's Clark County, so I know I'm in Clark County, Nevada. The tract code is 002302, which we would often refer to as 23.02, kind of take away the leading zeros, and there's an implicit decimal here between the suffix of the tract. And then we have a tab block here, which is 1018. There's no tab block suffix here, which tells you that this block, this current block, represents the same area as its parent 2020 block. So really, there's been no change. There's been no geography that's come here and split this up into multiple parts. So it's effectively the same block. And then we have a current state code 32, current county code 003. In the vast majority of cases, your block state and block county are going to be exactly the same. But in cases where you had state or county boundary changes, those codes can be different. And then we have the place code. This is the place FIPS code, which tells you it's 54600. So we can take this information from the GRFC, like cur state and place P, and use that to look in the GRFN and figure out, say, the name of this place or the land area of this place or whatever else we want to figure out about the whole entity. So if we go down to the GRFN here, I'm looking at an MTFCC of G4210 that identifies the census designated places or CDPs. There are two types of places that this place could refer to: a CDP, G4210, or an incorporated place, which would be G4110. So we match up the state code 32 to 32. We match up the FIPS code 54600, 54600, and we find out that this is the national standards code associated with this. The name of this place is Paradise. The name LSAD is Paradise CDP. Its functional status is S, which means it's a statistical entity. Its class FP is U1, which means it's a CDP with a recognized name. And then its area land is almost 110 million square meters, which is about 42 square miles. So that's how you connect the GRFC and GRFN. We have a product called gazetteer files, and these are sort of like simplified GRFNs, but they're organized by geographic area type. So each geographic area type is its own file. We create these for a wide range of geographic area types. The files include geographic identifiers, names, land area, water area, and internal points. So here's an example of a couple records from the county subdivision gazetteer file. These two records are in Maine. That's the USPS, that's their postal abbreviation code, basically. We have the GeoID, which in this case is made up of state, county, and county subdivision. And then we have the fully qualified GeoID, which brings the summary level into the picture. And then we get a national standards code, their names, so Durham Town and Greentown, functional status A, which means it's active. And then we have land area, water area. For these particular files, we also put these into our land area and water area into square miles too. And then we have internal points, latitude and longitude, so internal points. The county adjacency file is a very straightforward product that provides adjacent counties for every county in the U.S., Puerto Rico, and the island areas. The adjacency represented in the file includes two different types of adjacency: line adjacency, so they share a line segment, or point adjacency, so they just share like a point in common. However, with our last release of this file, we started releasing a length column that indicates that length of adjacency with the neighboring county. So let's take a look at a real world example here. We have Stanton County, Kansas. It's highlighted in yellow. And this down here is just a portion of this county adjacency file. All the records here, see the county on the left, they're all the same. They're all Stanton County. So this is basically telling you all of the adjacencies for Stanton County. If we look here, we've got Baca County, Colorado, which is over here. And this last field here is that length field I was telling you about. So that's 28,000 square mile. I'm sorry, 28,000 meters, which is about 17 and a half miles or so. And then we've got Prowers County here, also in Colorado, smaller adjacency. Grant County, Kansas, Hamilton County, Kansas, and then Kearney County. This one is interesting because this is one of those ones that where they don't share a line segment, they just share a point in common. So you'll see that length of 0, which can tell you that, oh, this is just a point in column. There's no line adjacency here. So that might be meaningful depending on how you're using this file. You might say, I'm only interested in line adjacencies. I don't really care about the point adjacencies. So that's why we've added that new information in there. And then we have Morton County and Stevens to round it out. And so that's how this file works. We also release lots of different types of relationship files. Relationship files aren't annual products, so everything else I've showed you so far is an annual product where every year we're putting out a version of it. These files are only released for decennial years and for congressional and legislative years. We have two different types of relationship files. The first provides relationships between the same geography type over time. For example, block relationship files that provide relationships between 2010 census blocks and 2020 census blocks. Or urban area relationship files that provide relationships between 2010 urban areas and 2020 urban areas. The other type of relationship file provides relationships between two different types of geography over the same period. For example, congressional districts to census tracts. So this is an example below of just a few records from a tract relationship file. So this is one of those relationship files that occurs over time. So our columns, our first three columns on the left, these identify the 2020 census tract. So we've got a GeoID, a name, LSAD, and an area land associated with that tract. So these three records they're all for the same tract, tract 1502. And so what this means is that this tract has relationships with three other 2010 tracts. And so these next three columns identify your 2010 tracts. So you've got your GeoID for that tract, you've got your name. So we've got a relationship with tract 15, a relationship with tract 26, and a relationship with tract 9819.02. This column on the far right here, area land part, that's a very important column because this tells you the significance in terms of land area that is associated with this relationship. So we have a value here which is about 29.9 million square meters for this first relationship for tract 15. The area of the 2020 tract is 30 million square meters. So basically, this first relationship is covering 99.7% of that of all of these relationships. So you can say that tract 15.02 in 2020 is almost completely made up of tract 15 from 2010. There are little pieces of these guys, but these last two records here between tract 26 and 9819.02, those together only make up 0.3% of this 2020 tract's land area. Okay, I'm going to move on from our relationship files to our address products. Now, due to restrictions associated with Title 13, we're not able to share our addresses or address locations with the public. So we have very limited address products that we can share with the public. After the 2020 census, we started releasing address count listing files. These files include the total housing unit counts and total group quarter counts by census block. We release these files twice per year, once after each of our 2 annual benchmarks in July and November. And these files are available by state and are based on current blocks. They can be joined to our current blocks layer in Tigerline products using the block GeoID field. And so this is a sample of just a few of the records from those files. You can see we have information related to the current state, county, tract, and block. And then we have a block GeoID. So that's your field that you would use to join to our Tigerline shape files if you wanted to see this spatially. And then we have our total housing units and total group quarters associated with each block record. Okay, and finally, the last product that I'm going to discuss as part of my presentation here is the Census Geocoder. The Census Geocoder is a really popular service that we provide. We receive approximately 15 million geocoding submissions daily, and some of those are single address submissions, and some of them are batch submissions. So it's actually a lot more than the 15 million that we're geocoding in terms of actual addresses every day. And so this service works against our address ranges. So it's not geocoding directly against the master address file because that would be a Title 13 issue. So it's just geocoding to those ranges. If it finds a match with one of those ranges, it provides you an interpolated coordinate that it then can check against our geography to tell you what geographic areas a particular coordinate is within. So as I mentioned, it has the ability to do both batch and single address. Actually, let me show you this next page here, where this is just a couple screen grabs from the geocoder page. So you can access the geocoder through an API, have computer programs hitting up against it. That's one way of using it, or you can use it interactively. And so these are two of the interactive screens. You see you have some various menus up here: find locations, find geographies, or there's a Luca menu. This example is from Find Geographies. I drop down. This is the one address line submission. So on this line here, I can type in an address, can hit get results, and it's going to, assuming that it gets a match, it will provide an interpolated coordinate, and it will provide me the geographies that are associated with it, common geographies like your state, your county, incorporated place, things like that. Down below is another example of find geographic coordinates. So if I have just the latitude and longitude, and I'm not really concerned with what the address is, I just have some points that I want to get geography associated with, I can use this to do that. Just provide the latitude and longitude, get results, and then it'll return the geographies that that's associated with. Both of these functions are available within the API. They're also available to do in batch mode too. So you could have a list of addresses and you could submit those in geocoding. You could have a list of coordinates and it would provide geography associated with each of those coordinates. Okay, so I want to thank you for your interest in this topic. We've covered a lot of our geospatial products in the last half hour, and I hope you found this useful and have learned about some of the products that you didn't know we released. I'm going to hand it over to Suzanne McCardle, and she's going to be discussing our mount products. Thank you very
much. Kevin, thank you. We actually got a whole bunch of questions for you, so if you don't mind, we'll have you look for those before people forget what they asked. So let me look. Okay, so using the 1 to 20 million cartographic boundary file leads to greater amount of overlap in the shapes. Is that why it's not preferred for analysis?
So it sort of depends on what you are using. When you say greater overlap of shapes, we maintain topology within our cartographic boundary file. So you're not going to have like the boundary of Ohio and Kentucky like overlapping and doing weird things. Like we maintain that topology, and we actually maintain the topology between layers too. But if you're doing like distance calculations, if you're doing anything where you're gonna you want to involve the area and know like this is the real boundary of this area, it might a cartographic boundary file that's looking at the boundary between Ohio and Kentucky might be, if you're looking at Ohio, it might be actually partially, it will be partially in Kentucky, and Kentucky's boundary will be partially in Ohio. So because they're not the real coordinates anymore, we've now modified them to make them better for thematic mapping or streaming. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I hope so. Another question, why does the Census Bureau use metric area and length measurements when the U.S. generally does not use these measurements in other areas?
That's a very good question. I honestly don't have the answer to that. I don't know if anyone else on Geo has that. As long as I've been here since 2005, we've always used meters for things, but then we put certain things out in square miles and we tell people how to convert between meters and square miles and meters and miles. I don't know if anyone else in here knows the answer to that. We can definitely take that back and see if we can figure out why we've done that.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting question too. For relationship files, are slivers removed in the area land field?
No, they're not removed. You should get the slivers back too. So when we're doing it's a little bit complicated to try to describe. I'll do my best to describe it over here without like necessarily having an intimate knowledge of how MapTiger works. But whenever we're creating relationship files, we're using the most current version of our topology. So like our edges, our faces, things like that. And that current version holds the most recent vintage of that geography, and it holds an older version. So if we're talking like a 2020 block to 2010 block relationship file. We basically have all the 2010 information in 2020 topology. And so anything that you're seeing that's a really small like overlap would be like a true overlap. Because let's say a road looked like this, like curved, and then it got straightened out because we just had it was just digitized incorrectly. So it went from that to that. Well, both that 2020 block and that 2010 block that are on that road, they're both moving with that when we do that. So it's a true, when we create those relationship files, it's based on that newest topology. And so those are really like real differences, as opposed to if we had the 2010 here, we had the 2020 here, then you would get that little sliver that pops out when we move that road.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Is there any, hold on, I'm trying to find the question. Okay. Oh, yes. Is there any momentum towards adding vintages to GeoID FQ?
So yeah, the GeoID FQ, it sort of has vintage in it for certain things that need vintage. So within any particular year, it's got that geo variant in there. So there are a few geographies, things like congressional districts, state legislative districts, that can appear within a data year for two different versions of that thing. So to give you an example, every 2 years when new congressional districts are created, we retabulate the 2020 census data based on those new districts. So we're in the 118th, the 119th congressional district right now. We have retabulated that data to 2020, to the 2020 census. So in the data year 2020, you have 3 different vintages of congressional district boundaries available. You have the 119th, the 118th, and the 116th, which is what we went into 2020 with. And so that geo variant accomplishes that. I understand that like if you're working with 2024 data and 2025 data, those things will have the same GeoID. And so I think maybe the question is getting at, are you going to incorporate a vintage that allows that to be resolved so that those could be unique geographies? There hasn't been any conversation around that I'm aware of.
Oh, okay, great. And I guess one last one, and then we'll have it go over to Suzanne, and we'll try to answer the other questions. Just a lot of interest in your presentation, Kevin. A lot of action here in the Q&A.
Great.
For the address count listing files, do you use a master address file to determine the housing units? And how is it updated twice a year?
Yes, we do. So we're updating we're constantly updating the map. We get files from the U.S. Postal Service, the delivery sequence file that we use to update the map twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall. And then we're doing other maintenance operations throughout the year. So we basically cut 2 different benchmarks every year. One is for the ACS. So we cut it in the summer. That's used for every annual ACS data release. And so we'll create address count listing files off that benchmark. And then we do it later in the fall, winter timeframe, and that's for to conduct our boundary and annexation survey. So that gets all the previous changes that governments provided throughout the BAS year, gets them into the benchmark so that by the time we conduct the next BAS, we've got all their changes in for the year. We pull that file off there too. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. And then go ahead, Suzanne. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Kevin. And good afternoon from Census headquarters in Suitland, Maryland. My name is Suzanne McCardle, and I'm thrilled to be here at what I hope is the first of many GeoForums, showing off the maps and tools brought to you by incredibly talented cartographers and geographers across Geography Division. As of next month, I'll have spent my 18-year career here at the Census Bureau supporting the creation and design of cartographic products within what is currently known as the Enterprise Geospatial Services branch. 10 years ago, I started supporting this work as a team leader And 2 years ago, I began supporting this work as a branch chief. I enjoy this work most on days like this, where I get to acknowledge and show off our amazing staff's cartographic prowess. So we promised a map product tour, and the map products we've released tie closely to our mission to serve as the nation's leading provider of quality data about its people and economy. So I'd like to dig right in there. The products I do get to show you today are accessible from the Data and Maps section of census.gov, or if you already know what you're looking for, you can use the search bar in the top right of census.gov. Don't worry, we are going to drop all of the links that I'll be walking you through today after my presentation in the Q&A section, so you don't need to keep up with any of this as I'm going here. I'm going to start off by highlighting a number of our static products first. We have many different methods to create the products that you'll see today. Some are exclusively hand-tailored and manually made using desktop GIS, like ArcGIS Pro, and we polish some of those products off. Some of our higher quality publication facing products, we finalize them off in software like Adobe Illustrator. Other products that we make are a mix of custom automated scripts with a mix of those scripts and interactive work. And others are fully automated and untouched by a cartographer from start to finish. Those maps are created using a custom in-house batch mapping piece of software that we like to call the Census Automated Map Production System, or CAMPS for short. Our most well-known claim to fame as an agency is conducting the decennial census, or counting everyone once, only once, in the right place every 10 years. So this feat is mandated by Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, and the decennial census results are used to apportion or distribute 435 seats among the 50 states in the U.S. House of Representatives. You're getting ready to take a look at 3 of our earliest map products that were released to communicate the 2020 census apportionment results. These were released back in April of 2021, excuse me. So the map you're looking at here highlights that Texas, Oregon, Montana, Colorado, North Carolina, and Florida all gained representation. The numbers within each state represent the total number of seats that have been apportioned to them. And in the top right, the map that I just appeared here in the top right, it features, it highlights that California and Texas were the only states that had more than 25 million people as of the 2020 census count. And the map here in the bottom right showcased the percent change in population for each of the states, DC and Puerto Rico. Staying on the congressional district theme for just a few moments, I'd like to introduce you to one of my favorite products. It's a map suite that consists of a large wall-sized national wall map, a set of state-based maps, and then individual congressional district-based maps that help define the congressional district boundaries in effect for the current 109th Congress that is in effect through January of next year. So I don't really have time to give a full history of how the wall map suite evolved into what it is today, but I learned that according to the Library of Congress, 1960 was the first time ever that the Census Bureau published a paper-bound congressional district atlas in which we presented the boundaries of the 86th Congress. To put into reference there, that was in the last 2 years of Dwight Eisenhower's presidency. So we've been producing a variety of the congressional district wall map product, map products since Dwight Eisenhower's presidency. Post-2000, we went digital and released this map suite on DVD and posted it online. So the particular map that you're looking at here depicts congressional district boundaries, again, for the 119th, the current Congress of the United States. It's a little bit wider than a 50-inch TV and a little bit taller than a 65-inch TV. The map includes county names and boundaries for each state, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the island areas known as American Samoa, Guam, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. The map also includes a listing of the names of all members of the 119th Congress as of January 2025. So if we take a quick tour off to the west here, the Pacific Ocean margin of the map, you'll see the map at the intended design, so the map as it was designed at scale, and a snippet of the full US Senate membership list. If we go over to the East Coast in the Atlantic Ocean margin, we have a snippet of the full listing of the US House of Representatives. If you walk back with me in history for just another moment, the 108th Congress was in session for the third and fourth years of George W. Bush's presidency, and that was the first time that Adobe PDF maps were introduced as a part of the Congressional District Atlas product, which was again released on disk and posted online. Single sheet, state-based, and individual congressional district-based maps were introduced because of the prevalence and existence of Tiger and Tiger files. Those products allowed folks to see the actual definitions of congressional district boundaries outside of the Congressional District Atlas. So we were able to sort of change our requirements in these products and create single sheet products so that the full area, a full state or a full congressional district was shown on one single map sheet. And I'm going to go ahead and walk you through what that product looks like for the state-based maps. So generally speaking, the state and congressional district-based based reference maps display the congressional district boundaries and a bunch of different related geographies. So the geographic areas and features displayed on each map really do vary based on the size and complexity of the specific state. So here we're taking a look at the Maryland congressional district map. Oh, excuse me here. So I've zoomed in to the Maryland base map that we just saw the sort of full overview of. And right now we're looking at a more at scale map extent for Congressional District 4 and the surrounding areas. This is where the Census Bureau headquarters building is located. So you can see the map at more of the intended scale. We have the state capital of Annapolis starred here. And each one of these state-based maps also comes with a population density map. So you're looking at the population density by census tract in the top portion of this profile. You can see that the state of Maryland is more densely populated around the surrounding areas of Washington, D.C., up the 95 corridor and into the Baltimore City region. We also have a bunch of other demographic data from the American Community Survey built into these maps. And since that 108th Congress, where we started creating these Adobe PDF products, we've also been plotting and delivering personalized copies of each one of the congressional district-based maps to Capitol Hill for each member of Congress. So this is one of my favorite parts of my favorite product that we produce. These are basically movie poster-sized maps that include a personalized title box, a high-quality, full-color reference map with a legend. These individual CD-based maps also include a individually tailored American Community Survey demographic data profile, similar to the state maps that we saw. And we also include a locator map. So the representative can see where their district is located within the state, but also its relative location to other districts within the state. Once those maps are produced, plotted, QC'd, trimmed and tubed, they're boxed up, as you can see here, for delivery to Capitol Hill, and they're also posted online as a public resource for everyone. It's really neat to see these products sort of out in the wild, seeing them showcased in different map exhibits or posted by members themselves on their social media pages. Often, if you've had an opportunity to visit any of your congressional representatives down in Capitol Hill, a number of them have these framed in all their on their walls. So the creation of these products is much more than all of the map production that I just sped through today. There are other areas in GEO that contribute to the creation of these maps. The Redistricting and Voting Rights Data Office here at the Census Bureau, the American Community Survey Office. There's lots of civil servants here who collect and process the boundaries, create special tabulations to make these maps possible. So next up, we have the Redistricting Data Map Suite. It is a collection of large format geo-referenced PDF maps that are generated with the geographic vintage of boundaries that are set for the 2020 census data dissemination. So all legal boundaries and names on these maps are as of January 1, 2020. There are over 408,000 map sheets that were produced to support this posting, and those were generated in that CAMPS software that I mentioned earlier. So over 408,000 map sheets were created from start to finish without any intervention from a cartographer. The automation of these maps is impressive and the content is important, but slides don't do these maps a whole lot of justice, as you can see with this overview of a 37-page bundled PDF. So here we have the live PDF that I've downloaded from census.gov, and I've pulled into Adobe Reader for you, free software that we recommend that you view our PDFs within. You can see that this is a county block map for Prince George's County. So I'm sort of outlining the county boundary here for you. And I'd like to go ahead and zoom in to a different sheet of this map so that you can see the full amount of detail that we're really trying to capture on these maps. Basically, the takeaway is that this map suite provides a detailed geo-referenced set of maps for counties, legislative districts, census tracts, and school districts. They detail the boundaries and features. If I scroll down here, you can take a look at the legend. So it provides a detailed map of the boundaries and features within MapTiger. Again, these help ensure that decision makers and stakeholders can accurately visualize the geographic areas for which the 2020 census tabulations will be disseminated. So another map product, another map series or suite that we publish is something called the 2020 Census Geographic Area Reference Maps. These are a much more digestible atlas-like series of maps. These are 8.5 by 11 standard page state-based PDFs. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through an example of this as well. So I've gone ahead and downloaded the Maryland Geographic Area Reference Map series. And so each one of these maps comes with a standard county outline map. So if I go ahead and click on that link from that index page, you'll see that I'm seeing a very basic map that shows all of the counties within the state of Maryland. The vintage of geographic boundaries within this map suite, all legal statistical area boundaries are as of January 1, 2020 as well. If I go ahead and show you some of the other state-based pages. So this is a map series that we do produce for each one of the states. So this is, as I mentioned, Maryland, and as you can see, so we have that state outline page, and then for each county, we have a further reference map that goes ahead and shows a number of the different geographic areas that are important and that are a part of the geographies that we release 2020 census data for. So that's a really neat product as well. Another post-decennial product that we get to create is a set of population profiles. So these are sourced from the demographic and housing characteristics file. That's one of the main data products that comes out of the 2020 census. And I'm going to go ahead and show you my home state of Maryland. You're learning a lot about Maryland here today. You can see the various elements of each one of the state profiles in this example of Maryland. There's a population density map that includes a mark for the Maryland mean center of population. The mean center of population is kind of a neat concept. Maryland's falls right in the southeastern part of Howard County, Maryland. And essentially, the mean center of population means that it's basically the balance point of the state. If you were to make everyone that lived in the state the same weight and place them where they live and hold the state up on your finger, that red balance point is where that the state of Maryland would remain balanced. There's a race breakdown of the state in the top right, as well as the Hispanic or Latino makeup of the state. We have the population by sex and age. And you can also see the percentage of housing units that are owner occupied or renter occupied or simply vacant. One of the other neat things about this is there is a historical population count from starting back with the 1980 census all the way up to 2020. So with that, I'd like to transition from the static product space to our footprint on the web. And you'll have to bear with me. I have a couple of live demos for you that I'm going to try to do as seamlessly as possible for you. But we do have an array of mapping tools. I have a number of them listed here. Essentially, from this slide, I just wanted to sort of make it obvious that some of our map products are updated multiple times a year. Kevin mentioned our benchmark where we create data from MapTiger as of July and as of November. So we have a couple of products that go out twice a year shortly after we complete that benchmarking process. We also have some applications that are updated annually, and then we have a subset of applications, and this is by no means a fully encompassing list of those, but some that are produced once a decade in support of a decennial census. One of the things that I just wanted to mention here before we do go on is that, we recognize that not everyone has access to geospatial technology or specialized geospatial expertise. Luckily, many people have access to web browsers, and people are getting more and more familiar with using mapping technology like ride-sharing applications, food delivery apps on our smartphones. So our web-based mapping tools really do enable users to explore our data in new ways with hopefully very little effort, and we're very conscious about that, and we want to make our data more accessible to folks, even GIS specialists. We want to make our data more accessible sort of right out the box without a lot of people having to do a whole lot of things. With that being said, I'd like to jump into the TigerWeb platform. We know that we do have a ton of GIS savvy specialists out there, web map application developers, state, local governments have often have GIS departments and other sort of support services. And so we do our best to allow those folks to have access to our data in in various ways, right? So I'm going to go ahead and show you the TigerWeb platform now. The TigerWeb applications themselves, I'm going to jump into in just a moment, but for sort of the more GIS savvy, the web developers, I did just want to highlight that we do have, excuse me, I need my cursor here for this. So we do have a number of open web services for folks to make use of, okay? So we have web map services available right from tigerweb.geo.census.gov, which is an OGC web map service interface. We urge you to use these. These are the authoritative legal and statistical boundaries right from MapTiger that we make available to everyone in the TigerWeb applications themselves. We also have those same set of services available as under the REST's specification. So again, these are available right from the main public TigerWeb platform. We have the overarching TigerWeb REST services that are the detailed shapes right from MathTiger. If you were lucky enough to sit in on Kevin's session just before this, he went through a really great overview of the difference between cartographic boundary files and detailed Tigerline shape files. Essentially, those cartographic boundary files are generalized services where we strip out a number of coordinates to make the data more performant, faster, more effective at various select scales. And so we also make a subset of those geographic areas available in generalized REST services for folks that might be looking to integrate those into their applications. So that's our map services page. I just wanted to make sure that you folks were aware of that. And I'd like to go ahead and jump into the main TigerWeb application here. There are actually 3 different versions of this. We have a current TigerWeb application. We have an application that allows you to compare the geographic vintages of decennial, from decennial census to decennial census. And we also have an economic census version of TigerWeb. Right now, I'm just going to be sort of highlighting a couple of the neat pieces of functionality for the current TigerWeb application. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just sort of zoom in to the local area that I've been talking about a lot today already. TigerWeb allows you to look at various geographic area boundaries. It also allows you to display various features like transportation, roads, and railroads. So the application functions pretty simply. There's a table of contents where you can toggle on and off various types of geography. I'm going to go ahead and put on some satellite imagery for us here and take us down closer to where we are sitting and hosting this GeoForum from. So we are located right here in these very oddly shaped census headquarter buildings. I'm going to go ahead and put on some place boundaries here. You can see that we are sitting right in the middle of Suitland, Maryland. If I click on Suitland, Maryland, I can expose some of the MathTiger attributes about this particular census designated place. If you missed what a census designated place is, I urge you to revisit John Policino's presentation from earlier this morning. But this TigerWeb platform and the applications themselves are really a web-based GIS. So you're able, they're filled with a lot of different reference information about the geographic areas and features that are within MathTiger. So I strongly urge you to come in here and explore this application on your own on the website itself. We do have a number of different resources, including a user guide down below. So looking forward to hearing your feedback about that particular tool and platform in the Q&A section or afterwards, where our customer engagement folks can follow up with you. We've been producing other map viewers more recently to help supplement some of our map product releases, or excuse me, our other product releases. So Kevin walked through what our address count listing files product looks like for you. We have made it our commitment to update to related viewers twice a year when those address count listing files are posted. So these viewers are fairly intuitive to use, and I'd like to go ahead and just demonstrate how to search for a local place and show you some of the data that's handy without you having to download any tools, any files or tools on your own. So we'll go ahead and look for 4600 Silver Hill Road, which is where we're sitting. Just to sort of get us down back to this general area of census headquarters. I'm hoping by using the same sort of geographic space, it'll help demonstrate some of the tool functionality a little bit better once you're familiar with the actual place that we're looking at here. All right, so this census block 2004 is not very interesting. It is because it is a Suitland, it is a federal center, and no one lives here. So there are a total of 0 housing units and a total of 0 group quarters. However, if we click on a more interesting block over here, we can see that there are 193 housing units. So this is a very basic viewer. It's identifying the actual block that we're looking at by its fully qualified GeoID, by its block GeoID, and a couple of the other important pieces of hierarchies for you, what state it's in, county, what tract, and that area land and area water value that Kevin was showing that are show up in a number of our products. If I go over to something called the Housing Unit Change Viewer, this is one of our newer products. We can travel, surprise, to our Census Bureau headquarters again, and I can show you a couple of other neat things about this. So in the last address count listing files viewer, we noticed that there were no housing unit counts on our Suitland Federal Center. But if I click on the same block that I clicked on a little while ago, we can see that while this particular block, this is not the exact same block, so bear with me here, but this particular block has 163 housing units added since 2000. So in the pop-up, we have a historical accounting of the history of this particular block. So you can see, pardon me, so I was looking at the wrong thing here. So this block did have housing units in 2020. It only had 30 of them. You can see in 2023, it had 53, 2024, 199. And so that change in the total number of housing units was 163. That's a 543% increase in housing units. So this has been one of our more popular tools. I urge you to go in here and explore your local neighborhood or anywhere else that interests you. And again, I'm happy to maybe take some more questions about those two tools in the Q&A portion of this session here. So I'm coming towards the end of some of our demos here. I did just want to highlight that another one of our capabilities that we have is the ability to push out live or semi-live automated updates. So I don't know who might be familiar with the Boundary and Annexation Survey. This is a survey where different levels of government respond to the Census Bureau on an annual basis on whether or not they have updates to any of their legal boundaries. This tool is updated to public-facing tool, updated Tuesdays and Thursdays, so you can track along right alongside us what the actual national response rate to this particular survey is. So as of this morning at about 7 a.m., we have 18.88% of the total governments that are responding. We can see that Pennsylvania has responded, and we've actually already received their submission. We can see that the state of Vermont has responded, and they don't have any changes to report. So this is kind of a neat tool if you're familiar with BAS and would like to explore who's responding and how quickly they're responding to that survey. We support a number of other program areas. So the community resilience estimates are a fairly new product. We've been putting these maps out for the past couple of years here, and these are updated and on an annual basis. We have a stateside tool, as well as a tool explicitly built for just Puerto Rico. So I urge you to check those out. And we also support 2030 census planning efforts already, right? So in the years leading up to the 2020 census, the Census Bureau released a web mapping application to make one of its tabular data sets called the planning database more accessible to our stakeholders. It was a widely used and touted tool to support efforts in increasing self-response rates across the country and to help keep our decennial census costs lower. And we've recently released a version of this tool called Rome that's already starting to help with those 2030 planning efforts. As a result of the decennial census results, we've released a 2020 census demographic data map viewer, as well as a viewer that broke down different levels of quality for the decennial census. So those are all available online as well. And with that, I think I'd like to go ahead and call it there. And John, I don't know if you have a bunch of questions for me, or I can jump back in to any of the tools that folks want to see. So over to you.
I thought it was wonderful. There was really great interest in all of your maps and products, and to that we have actually available here I'm posted right in the chat, link to the Census Academy page, which is for today's GeoForum, but as part of the materials is all the resources, links to all the resources that Suzanne just mentioned, so go ahead and use that. And these presentations will be posted later on. One question, yes. The housing unit change data, is that available in the form of a spreadsheet instead of just a map, for example, for all block groups in a county?
That is a great question. We do not have the actual housing unit change data posted as a separate file that I'm aware of. Getting that question and knowing that Kevin Hawley, my boss, is still on the line, I'm thinking that that might be something that we consider adding into the mix. So we'll definitely take that one back. Kevin, I'm not sure if you have any direct feedback on that.
Yeah, we'll take that into consideration. So right now there is, you do have the 2020 address count listing files and the current count listing files, so they can be generated because those are both, two different text files, so they can be created. That's essentially how we create them. But yeah, we can consider posting that as well.
Wonderful. One comment. I believe this is when you were showing the congressional maps, that they are exquisite maps, and I agree. Great work done by the team. Is the response outreach area mapper available for Puerto Rico, or will it be made available for Puerto Rico?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the response outreach area mapper does have Puerto Rico data included within it. However, the low response score is an operational metric that is calculated and in-house, right? It is calculated in-house, and it is a metric that's created at the census tract level across the state side portion of the United States. Unfortunately, the same model, and this is outside of my wheelhouse, I'm not a statistician by training or desire, but the low response score model does not produce good enough results for the Puerto Rico side of the house. So I know that the team that's developing the low response score and creating the models to create that predicted self-response score is looking into how to measure that for Puerto Rico, but the actual regression modeling right now doesn't do the census tracts in Puerto Rico justice. So the actual low response score for Puerto Rico is not going to be included in the response outreach area mapper now, and I'm not sure at what point that team might be able to develop that score that is tailored more towards Puerto Rico. However, Rome does still have all of the other attribution that's available in the planning database. So if you click on a census tract in Puerto Rico, you can still see the full complement, the full suite of demographic and socioeconomic data variables for the Puerto Rican census tracts.
Great, thank you. A question about Tiger Web. Will you be able to share? I don't know if you want to go back into this. I think that might be what they might be asking. Are you able to? How is sharing work with Tiger Web? Are you able to share specific areas of the map with other people, printing, etc.?
Gotcha. So yeah, so we are. Let me go ahead and take a step back here. So as of right now, internally, we are sort of developing what the next generation of Tiger Web is going to look like. One of the things that we're actively working on and are going to make sure that is a little bit better in the forthcoming to be decided upon re-engineered Tiger Web is going to be able to share a specific map extent of an area. So I don't know if folks are super familiar with URLs or visiting different websites, but sometimes when you visit a tool, the URL in the address bar sort of builds out onto itself and shows what map extent, what geographic area you're looking in. The current version of TigerWeb that's published and public facing doesn't have that capability yet. It will at some point in the undetermined future here. We do have a print tool where you can print the actual content of what is on screen into a PDF, but we don't have that live application sharing working in this version, but it will be forthcoming in a redesigned TigerWeb application that's going to be published at some point in the future.
Okay, great. Let's see, any other questions for you all? Once again, wonderful presentation. Thanks so much for sharing with us. Here's just thank you for help throughout the year and all that everyone at Census does. So thanks to everyone at Census. Thanks for that thank you message to all of us. I think that's all I have right here. So once again, thank you, Kevin and Suzanne. Give me one moment while I vamp for a second. So right now we have a bit of a break until 2:45 when we will be talking about geographic partnerships. If you didn't get your questions answered today, or if you have more answers spurred by our discussions, we will have a dedicated question and answer period tomorrow with many more geography area subject matter experts will be able to answer your questions